The needle slipped through Isla's calloused finger for the third time that morning, drawing a bead of crimson that stained the ivory silk she'd been embroidering for Lady Miriam's wedding gown. She pressed her lips together, swallowing the curse that threatened to escape as she dabbed at the spot with a clean cloth, praying the blood stain wouldn't set permanently into the expensive fabric. The other seamstresses in Madame Cordelia's shop would never let her forget such a costly mistake, especially not when they already whispered about her clumsy hands and unremarkable appearance whenever they thought she couldn't hear. "Clumsy as always, Isla," sneered Vivienne from across the workroom, her golden curls catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. "Perhaps you should stick to mending torn petticoats rather than working on garments for nobility." The other girls tittered behind their hands, their laughter sharp as broken glass in the cramped space filled with bolts of fabric and half-finished gowns hanging like colorful ghosts from wooden mannequins. Isla kept her eyes fixed on her work, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face as she carefully repositioned the needle. At 20, she had grown accustomed to being the target of their cruel amusement, the girl who didn't belong among the prettier, more skilled seamstresses who came from merchant families with connections and dowries. She was the foundling who had appeared on Madame Cordelia's doorstep 15 years ago. With nothing but a tattered blanket and a strange birthmark shaped like intertwining roses on her left shoulder that she kept carefully hidden beneath her modest clothing. "Leave a girl be!" Madame Cordelia's voice cut through the chatter like a blade, her steel-gray eyes surveying the workroom with practiced authority. Though she was stern and often harsh in her criticism, she had never allowed outright cruelty under her roof, perhaps because she too had once been an outsider in the world of fashion and nobility. "We have orders to complete, and Lady Miriam's gown must be perfect for her ceremony next week." The workshop fell silent except for the soft whisper of thread through fabric and the distant sounds of horse hooves on cobblestones from the street below. Isla bent over her embroidery, grateful for the reprieve, though she knew it would be temporary. Tomorrow would bring fresh taunts and subtle sabotage, the endless cycle of small humiliations that had defined her existence for as long as she could remember. As the afternoon wore on, and the other girls departed for their homes and families, Isla remained at her station, working by candlelight to fix the damage to Lady Miriam's gown. The blood stain had come out, thankfully, but she wanted to ensure every stitch was perfect before presenting it to Madame Cordelia in the morning. The shop grew quiet around her, filled only with the soft crackle of candle flames and the occasional creak of old wood settling. It was in this peaceful solitude that she felt at first a strange warmth spreading through her chest, as if someone had lit a fire in her heart. She paused in her stitching, pressing a hand to her breast, wondering if she was falling ill. Tomorrow was her 21st birthday, though she had no plans to celebrate. Birthdays were for people with families and friends, not for foundlings who worked alone in empty shops while the rest of the world slept. The warmth intensified, spreading down her arms and into her fingertips where they held the needle. To her amazement, the embroidery thread began to shimmer with an otherworldly light, the roses she had been stitching seeming to bloom with life beneath her touch. She gasped and dropped the needle, watching in wonder as the luminous thread continued to glow for several heartbeats before fading back to its ordinary golden hue. "What in the 7 realms?" she whispered to herself, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. She must be more tired than she realized, seeing things that couldn't possibly be real. Magic was the province of the nobility, not common seamstresses who lived in cramped attic rooms above fabric shops. She gathered her supplies and climbed the narrow stairs to her quarters, trying to convince herself that exhaustion had played tricks on her vision. Her small room was sparse but clean, containing only a narrow bed, a wooden chest for her few belongings, and a cracked mirror that reflected her unremarkable features back at her. Brown hair, brown eyes, pale skin marked by years of indoor work she had always been perfectly, forgettably ordinary. Yet as she prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection and froze. Her eyes, which had always been a muddy brown, now held flecks of gold that seemed to dance in the candlelight like tiny stars. Sleep came fitfully, filled with strange dreams of ancient temples and voices calling her name in languages she didn't recognize. She saw herself dressed in flowing robes of rose and gold, standing before an altar where dozens of couples knelt to receive her blessing. There were 3 figures in the shadows beyond the altar, their faces obscured but their presence commanding and familiar, as if she had known them across lifetimes. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through her single window, and the strange dreams felt more real than the shabby room around her. Her 21st birthday had arrived with no fanfare, just another day of work and whispered insults from the other seamstresses. Yet as she dressed and prepared to face the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the world overnight. The first sign that this birthday would be different came when she touched the door handle to leave her room. The brass knob grew warm beneath her palm, and for a moment, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of wind chimes, though there were none in the building. She pulled her hand away quickly, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Downstairs in the workroom, Madame Cordelia was already inspecting Lady Miriam's completed gown, her expression unreadable as she examined every seam and embellishment. Isla approached nervously, waiting for the critique she was certain would come. Instead, her employer's eyes widened as she looked more closely at the embroidered roses. "This is exquisite work," Madame Cordelia murmured, running her fingers over the delicate stitching. "The roses look so lifelike, as if they might bloom at any moment." She glanced up at Isla with something approaching respect in her stern features. "I never seen you produce work of this quality before. Perhaps you finally found your calling." Before Isla could respond, the shop door burst open with such force that the bell above it rang frantically. 3 figures strode in with the confident bearing of nobility, their rich clothing and jeweled accessories marking them as members of the highest social circles. The first was a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, dressed in the deep purple and gold of the northern kingdom of Valdris. Behind him came a woman with flamme-red hair and emerald eyes, wearing the forest green and silver of the eastern kingdom of Sultara. The third figure was younger, with dark hair and warm brown eyes, his clothing bearing the crimson and black of the southern kingdom of Nethys. "We seek the one called Isla," the silver-haired man announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "We have traveled far to find her." Madame Cordelia stepped protectively in front of Isla, her weathered hands smoothing her apron with nervous energy. What business could nobles have with a simple seamstress? She has done nothing wrong. The red-haired woman smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. On the contrary, she has done something very right. She has awakened. Her gaze found Isla's face, and recognition flared in those emerald depths. "We felt the surge of power last night, as did every court mage in the 3 kingdoms. The goddess of love has returned to the mortal realm." Isla's knees nearly buckled at the words. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the thundering of her heart. "I'm nobody special. I'm just a foundling who works with needle and thread." The younger man stepped forward, his expression gentler than his companion's. "You are Amorata, the divine patroness of love and devotion, reborn into mortal form. The birthmark on your shoulder bears the symbol of intertwining roses, does it not? It is the mark of your divine nature." The blood drained from Isla's face. She had never told anyone about the birthmark, keeping it hidden even from Madame Cordelia. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because we have been searching for you for decades," the woman replied. "I am Lady Seraphina of Sultara, and these are Lord Cassius of Valdris and Prince Darian of Nephis. We represent the 3 great kingdoms, all of whom have claim to your allegiance." "Claim to her allegiance?" Madame Cordelia's voice rose with indignation. "She is not a prize to be won or a possession to be claimed." Lord Cassius's cold blue eyes fixed on the older woman with barely concealed contempt. "You dare speak of matters beyond your understanding, shopkeeper? The goddess's return heralds a new age of prosperity for whichever kingdom she chooses to bless with her presence. Wars have been fought over less." The casual mention of warfare sent a chill through Isla's veins. She looked between the 3 nobles, seeing the tension that crackled between them like lightning before a storm. "I won't be the cause of bloodshed," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "If what you say is true, then surely the goddess Surely I would want peace, not war." Prince Darian nodded approvingly. "Spoken like a true divine being. This is precisely why you must come with us. to prevent the chaos that would surely follow if you remained unprotected and unclaimed. Unclaimed, Isla repeated, tasting the bitter word. Even as a supposed goddess, it seemed she was still destined to be treated as property rather than a person. And what if I refuse? What if I choose to remain here, living my simple life? Lady Seraphina's laugh was sharp as crystal. My dear girl, you felt the awakening last night, did you not? The surge of power that runs through your veins even now? You cannot suppress your divine nature any more than you can hold back the tide. Within days, every magical creature and ambitious noble in the realm will sense your presence. You will be hunted, captured, or worse. As if summoned by her words, a tremendous crash shook the building, followed by inhuman roars that seemed to come from the very depths of nightmare. Through the shop windows, Isla glimpsed massive, shadowy forms moving through the streets, their eyes glowing with malevolent fire as they searched for something or someone. Shadow wraiths, Prince Darien breathed, his hand moving instinctively to the sword at his side. They're drawn to divine essence like moths to flame. We need to leave, now. Lord Cassius moved with lightning speed, grasping Isla's arm with fingers that felt like iron bands. She comes with me to Valdris, where she'll be properly protected. Over my dead body, Lady Seraphina snarled, her own hand wrapping around Isla's other arm. Siltara has the strongest magical defenses in the realm. She'll be safest there. Both of you release her at once, Prince Darien commanded, though his voice carried more authority than his years should have allowed. As the neutral party amidst dispute, Nethys offers sanctuary while she decides her own fate. Isla found herself at the center of a literal tug-of-war between three powerful nobles, while otherworldly monsters prowled the streets outside, drawn by the very power she was only beginning to understand. The absurdity of the situation might have been amusing if not for the very real danger closing in around them. Enough! The word erupted from her lips with such force that the shop windows rattled in their frames. Golden light blazed from her skin, and for a moment, she felt the full weight of her divine heritage pressing against her consciousness like a tide of ancient memories. I will not be claimed like a treasure or fought over like a bone between dogs. If I truly am what you say I am, then I have the right to choose my own path. The three nobles released her immediately, stepping back with expressions of awe and wariness. Even Madame Cordelia had gone pale, her weathered hands clasped tightly before her as she stared at the girl she had raised from a child. You speak truly, my lady, Prince Darien said, offering a respectful bow. The choice must be yours, but choose quickly. The shadow wraiths grow bolder with each passing moment. Through the windows, Isla could see the dark creatures pressing closer to the shop, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke given malevolent life. Citizens fled screaming through the streets while the city guards' weapons passed harmlessly through the supernatural attackers. Only her divine presence kept the wraiths from entering the shop directly, but she could feel their hunger pressing against the invisible barrier like a physical weight. If I go with one of you, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them, what guarantee do I have that the others won't simply wage war to claim me? The three nobles exchanged glances that spoke of old rivalries and barely contained hostilities. It was Lord Cassius who answered first, his silver hair catching the strange light that still emanated from Isla's skin. The Northern Kingdom offers you more than mere protection, he said, his voice smooth as silk over steel. Valdris has stood for 1,000 years. Our mountain fortresses unconquerable, our armies the finest in the realm. As our patron goddess, you would want for nothing jewels, gowns, palaces beyond imagining, and you would have the power to reshape the world according to your divine will. Lady Seraphina scoffed. Pretty words from a man whose kingdom is built on conquest and subjugation. Siltara offers you something more precious than gold knowledge. Our libraries contain the accumulated wisdom of ages, including texts that speak of your previous incarnations. Come with us and we will help you understand the full scope of your abilities and your purpose. Prince Darien's approach was different, his tone gentle but earnest. Nethys asks not what you can do for us, but what we can do for you. Our kingdom values individual choice above all else. With us you would be honored and protected, but never commanded. The decision of how to use your gifts would remain yours alone. Another crash shook the building, this one accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The shadow wraiths were testing the boundaries of whatever force kept them at bay, probing for weaknesses like predators seeking entry to a henhouse. Isla realized with growing horror, but her mere presence was endangering not just herself and those in the shop, but the entire city. "I need time to think," she said, though she knew time was the one luxury she didn't have. "These are not decisions to be made in haste." "Then come with me to the neutral territories," Prince Darian offered. "There's an ancient sanctuary there, warded against both magical and mundane threats. You could have a fortnight to consider your options without pressure from any kingdom." "The neutral territories are a fiction, Lord," Cassia said dismissively. "A collection of minor lordlings and merchant princes with no real power to protect anyone. At least they're not ruled by tyrants who see people as chess pieces to be moved at will," Lady Seraphina retorted, her emerald eyes flashing with anger. Their argument was interrupted by Madame Cordelia's voice, cracked with age and emotion. "Child," she said, reaching out to touch Isla's cheek with trembling fingers. "Whatever you truly are, you've been like a daughter to me these 15 years. I cannot bear the thought of losing you, but I can see that staying here will only bring destruction to innocent people." Isla caught the older woman's hand in both of hers, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "You gave me a home when no one else would. How can I abandon you now?" "You're not abandoning me," Madame Cordelia said firmly. "You're fulfilling your destiny, but promise me this: whatever power you possess, whatever throne you may claim, remember the girl who sat in my workshop and learned to find beauty in simple things. Don't let the weight of divinity crush the kindness in your heart." The words hit Isla like a physical blow, reminding her of all the small cruelties she had endured, all the times she had been dismissed and overlooked. Yet here was someone who had seen value in her when the rest of the world saw only an inconvenient foundling. The thought of leaving felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. Another inhuman roar echoed through the streets, closer now. The shadow wraiths had grown bolder, their forms pressing against the shop's windows like living darkness seeking to devour the light within. Isla could feel their hunger, their desperate need to consume the divine essence that blazed within her newly awakened consciousness. "The sanctuary," she said suddenly, turning to Prince Darian. "Tell me more about this place." "The Temple of Concordia," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "Built in the ancient days when gods walked openly among mortals. It's warded by magic older than the three kingdoms, neutral ground where no weapon can be raised in anger. You would be safe there while you decide your path." Lord Cassius's expression darkened. "And what assurance do we have that Nethys won't use this time to influence her decision unfairly?" "The same assurance I have that Valdris won't send assassins to remove the competition," Prince Darian replied coolly. "We must trust in the goddess's wisdom to see through any deception." Lady Seraphina studied Isla with calculating eyes. "Very well. But I insist on accompanying you to ensure your safety. One representative from each kingdom, to provide counsel and protection." "Agreed," Lord Cassius said after a moment's hesitation. "Though I warn you both, any attempt to coerce or manipulate the goddess will be met with the full force of Valdris's displeasure." The building shook again, and this time, cracks appeared in the windows. The shadow wraiths were growing stronger, feeding on the fear and chaos spreading through the city. Isla realized she had no choice but to leave immediately, before her presence brought devastation to the only place she had ever called home. "How do we get past them?" she asked, gesturing toward the dark forms that now completely surrounded the shop. Prince Darian withdrew a crystal pendant from beneath his shirt, its surface gleaming with inner light. "A teleportation stone, key to the sanctuary. It can transport 4 people instantly, but only to that specific location." "Then we go now," Isla said, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She turned to Madame Cordelia one last time, memorizing every line of the woman's weathered face. "Thank you for everything. I'll find a way to repay your kindness." "Live well, child," Madame Cordelia replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That's payment enough for an old woman's heart." The four of them joined hands around the glowing crystal, and Isla felt a moment of vertigo as the world dissolved into swirling light and shadow. The last thing she saw was Madame Cordelia's face, brave and sad, watching her chosen daughter disappear into an uncertain future. When the light faded, they stood in a circular chamber made of white marble shot through with veins of gold. Ancient runes covered the walls, pulsing with a soft radiance that seemed to respond to Isla's presence. Tall windows showed a view of rolling hills and crystal-clear streams, a landscape of such beauty that it took her breath away. This was the Temple of Concordia, and she could feel its ancient power wrapping around her like a protective embrace. "Welcome to your temporary sanctuary," Prince Darien said, releasing her hand with obvious reluctance. "No harm can come to you within these walls, and you'll have all the time you need to understand your awakening powers." Lady Seraphina moved to one of the windows, her reflection multiplied in the crystal-clear glass. "The temple is lovely, but we should discuss the practical matters. Each of our kingdoms has prepared gifts and inducements for your consideration." "Inducements," Isla repeated, tasting the word like bitter medicine. "You make it sound like a business transaction." Lord Cassius stepped forward, his expression earnest despite the coldness in his pale eyes. "In many ways, it is exactly that. Your divine patronage could shift the balance of power across the entire continent. The kingdom you choose will prosper, while the others may face decades of decline." The weight of that responsibility settled on Isla's shoulders like a lead cloak. She had awakened to her divine nature less than a day ago, and already the fate of nations hung in the balance. The girl who had been nobody special was now expected to make decisions that would affect millions of lives. "I need to understand what I've become," she said, moving to the center of the chamber where the golden veins in the marble seemed to converge. "These powers, these memories that aren't quite memories, I can't make informed choices while stumbling around in the dark." Prince Darien nodded approvingly. "Wisdom beyond your apparent years. The temple's archives contain extensive records of your previous incarnations, including the circumstances of your last mortal death." "I died before?" Isla asked, though somehow she wasn't surprised by the revelation. 300 years ago," Lady Seraphina confirmed, "during the War of the Burning Crown, when the mad King Alderic tried to bind you to his will through forbidden magic. You chose to surrender your divine form rather than be enslaved, but the ritual's backlash killed you and most of his court." Images flashed through Isla's Minda throne room filled with screaming courtiers, chains of dark magic wrapping around her wrists. The terrible choice between submission and oblivion. The memory felt both foreign and familiar, like a story she had heard long ago but never quite forgotten. "The magical backlash created a deadland that still exists today," Lord Cassius added grimly. "Nothing grows there, nothing lives. It serves as a reminder of what happens when mortals try to claim dominion over the divine." "But if I died," Isla said slowly, "how am I here now? How does reincarnation work for goddesses?" "Divine essence cannot be destroyed," Prince Darien explained. "It can only be transformed or temporarily dispersed. Your soul fragmented when you died, scattering across the realm until it was ready to reform. The process usually takes centuries, sometimes millennia." "But I was found as a baby 21 years ago," Isla protested. "That would mean that your essence reformed unusually quickly," Lady Seraphina finished. "We believe it's because the realm has been lacking in divine love for too long. The natural order demands balance, and your absence has created a void that pulled your scattered soul back together." The explanation made a strange kind of sense, though it raised as many questions as it answered. Isla moved to one of the tall windows, looking out at the peaceful landscape while her mind raced with implications. If what they said was true, then her awakening wasn't just about personal power. It was about restoring balance to the world itself. "What changed?" she asked. "What made me awaken now, on my 21st birthday? We're not entirely certain," Prince Darien admitted, "but we believe it's connected to the current political situation. The three kingdoms have been on the brink of war for months, and the emotional turmoil may have triggered your reawakening. Or perhaps," Lord Cassius suggested with a meaningful look at his companions, It was the depth of despair and loneliness you experienced in your mortal life. Divine love often emerges from the deepest understanding of its absence. His words struck closer to home than Isla cared to admit. She had indeed felt profoundly alone. Not just in the cruel environment of the seamstress shop, but in a fundamental way that went beyond mere social isolation. It was as if she had been searching for something or someone that always remained just out of reach. "There's something else," Lady Seraphina said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Something the histories mention but don't fully explain. In your previous incarnation, you had a mortal lover, someone who was more than human but not quite divine. The records suggest that losing them was what made you vulnerable to King Alderic's binding magic." Isla's heart clenched with an emotion she couldn't name, a grief that felt both ancient and immediate. "What happened to them?" "No one knows," Prince Darian said gently. "They vanished during the chaos of your death, and no trace has ever been found. But some scholars believe that divine love, once given, creates an eternal bond. If they lived, they might still be out there, waiting." The possibility sent a thrill through Isla's chest, followed immediately by a wave of uncertainty. How could she long for someone she couldn't even remember? Yet the feeling was undeniable. A pull toward something missing that she had carried all her life without understanding its source. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Prince Darian straightened, his expression becoming alert and focused. "Someone approaches the temple," he said. "The wards are announcing a visitor." Through the windows they could see a figure walking up the winding path toward the temple entrance, even at a distance. There was something compelling about the way they moved, a grace that spoke of otherworldly origins. As the figure drew closer, Isla felt her breath catch in her throat. It was a man, tall and lean with hair the color of moonlight, and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of starlit skies. He wore simple traveling clothes, but there was an aura of power around him that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Most striking of all was the way Isla's heart began to race at the sight of him. As if some part of her recognized him, even though her conscious mind held no memory of their meeting. "Who is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The three nobles had gone very still, their faces reflecting various degrees of shock and wariness. It was Lady Seraphina who answered, her voice tight with implications Isla didn't yet understand. "That," she said, "is someone who is supposed to be dead." The mysterious visitor reached the temple entrance, and Isla heard the great doors opening with a resonance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the sanctuary. Footsteps echoed through the corridors beyond their chamber, measured and purposeful, growing closer with each heartbeat. When he finally appeared in the doorway, Isla felt the world tilt on its axis. Those starlit eyes found hers across the room, and in their depths she saw recognition, longing, and a love that had endured across centuries of separation. Her divine essence responded to his presence like a flower turning toward the sun, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was the missing piece of her soul. "Amorata," he said, and his voice carried the weight of ages, the pain of endless searching, and the joy of finally finding what had been lost. "I told you I would find you again." The name he spoke wasn't Isla, but somehow it felt more real than anything she had ever been called. She took a step toward him, then another, drawn by a force stronger than gravity or magic. This was her mortal lover from the previous incarnation, the one who had vanished during her death and destruction. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived the centuries and found her again. "I don't remember," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I don't remember you, but you feel it," he said, moving closer with that same inhuman grace. "The connection between us, it transcends memory, transcends even death itself." Behind her, the three nobles were in heated whispered conversation, their carefully laid plans suddenly thrown into chaos by this unexpected development. But Isla barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the man before her, the one who looked at her as if she were the answer to every prayer he had ever uttered. "What's your name?" she asked, reaching out tentatively to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, solid and real, proof that this wasn't another dream or vision. "I have had many names over the centuries," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "But you call me Lysander, and that is who I remain until the end of time." The sound of his name unlocked something deep in Isla's consciousness, a flood of emotions and half-formed images that left her gasping. She saw him kneeling before her divine form in a moonlit garden, pledging his eternal devotion. She felt the terror of watching King Alderic's soldiers drag him away, the desperate fury that had made her vulnerable to the binding magic. And underlying it all was a love so profound it had survived the destruction of her divine form and the passage of 3 centuries. "How?" she managed to ask through her tears. "How are you here?" "Love," he said simply. "Love gave me strength to endure when death would have been a mercy. I searched for you in every face, followed every rumor of divine awakening, never allowing myself to believe you were truly gone." Lord Cassius cleared his throat loudly, his expression thunderous with barely contained rage. "This changes nothing," he declared. "The goddess still must choose a kingdom to patron. Personal attachments cannot be allowed to interfere with matters of state." Lysander's starlit eyes turned toward the northern lord, and Isla felt a chill run through the chamber. "You speak of the goddess as if she were property to be distributed among bidders," he said, his voice carrying an edge of otherworldly menace. "I was ancient when your kingdoms were nothing but tribal settlements, and I will not allow her to be used as a political pawn. And what are you exactly?" Lady Seraphina demanded, her emerald eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You're clearly not mortal, but you lack the presence of true divinity. What manner of being survives 3 centuries without aging?" "I am what your legends call a guardian," Lysander replied, never taking his eyes off Isla's face. "Neither fully mortal nor divine, but something between. I was created to serve and protect the goddess, and that purpose has sustained me through the long years of exile." Prince Darian stepped forward, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "The ancient texts speak of such beings, but they were thought to be mythical. How do we know you are what you claim to be?" In response, Lysander extended his hand, and golden light began to emanate from his palm. But this wasn't the warm, nurturing radiance of Isla's divine essence. This was something fiercer, more focused, the light of a guardian star, burning with protective fury against the darkness that would threaten what it cherished. "I am bound to her by bonds forged in the heart of creation itself," he said, his voice resonating with power that made the temple walls hum in harmony. "I cannot be separated from her by distance, death, or the machinations of mortal kingdoms. Where she goes, I follow. What threatens her faces my wrath." The declaration sent a thrill through Isla's heart, but it also filled her with a new kind of uncertainty. The 3 nobles had offered her choices, even if they came with political strings attached. But Lysander's words suggested a destiny that was already written, a bond that allowed for no alternatives. "I need to understand," she said, stepping back from both him and the 3 nobles. "I need to understand what I am, what we are, before I can make any decisions about kingdoms or guardians or anything else." The hurt that flashed across Lysander's features was like a blade to her heart, but she forced herself to remain strong. "I don't doubt what you're telling me," she continued. "I can feel the truth of it in my bones, but I've lived 21 years as a mortal girl, and I can't simply erase that existence because my divine nature has awakened." "The archives," Prince Darian said quietly. "They contain detailed records of your previous incarnations, including your relationship with the Guardian. Perhaps understanding the past will help clarify the present." Lord Cassius looked like he wanted to object, but even he seemed to recognize that the situation had moved beyond simple political maneuvering. The arrival of Lysander had introduced complications that no amount of planning could have anticipated. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth. "But I insist that all information be shared equally among all parties. No private consultations or secret revelations." Lady Seraphina nodded reluctantly. "Agreed, though I suspect what we learn may not be comfortable for any of us." The temple's archives were located in a vast circular chamber beneath the main sanctuary, its walls lined with crystalline formations that held knowledge in forms both written and experiential. As they descended the spiral staircase, Isla felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, the accumulated wisdom of ages waiting to be unlocked. The crystal that contained her personal history was larger than the others, its surface swirling with colors that shifted like captured aurora. When Prince Darien activated it with a touch of his magic, the chamber filled with images and sensations that transported them directly into the past. Isla saw herself as she had been in her previous incarnation, tall and radiant, with hair like spun gold and eyes that held the warmth of every sunset. She was standing in a garden of impossible beauty, where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, and fountains sang with voices like crystal bells. And there, kneeling before her divine form, was Lysander as he had been 3 centuries ago. "I offer you my service, my devotion, my very essence," his younger self was saying, his voice filled with awe and reverence. "I ask for nothing in return but the privilege of standing at your side." "Rise, my faithful one," the goddess replied, her voice like music made manifest. "I accept your service, but I offer you something more precious than duty. I offer you my love, freely given, without condition or reservation." The scene shifted, showing them in moments of perfect happiness walking hand in hand through realms of wonder, sharing quiet conversations beneath starlit skies, dancing to music that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of reality itself. Their love was a thing of beauty that transcended mortal understanding, a union between divine and created that enhanced both without diminishing either. But then the visions darkened, showing the coming of King Alderic and his court of twisted mages. The Mad King had become obsessed with binding divine power to his will, believing that controlling a goddess would make him invincible. The crystal showed his soldiers storming the sacred groves, capturing Lysander while Amorata was away blessing a harvest festival in a distant village. "You will call her to me," Alderic commanded, his eyes blazing with madness and forbidden magic. "You will be the bait that draws the goddess into my trap." "I would die first," Lysander replied, his star-bright power flaring in defiance even as the enchanted chains burned his flesh. "Death would be too merciful," the king snarled. "But watching her suffer for your defiance, that will break you completely." The vision shifted to show Amorata's return, her divine senses immediately alerting her to her beloved's distress. She appeared in the king's throne room like a blazing star, her power making the very stones of the castle sing with harmonious resonance. "Release him," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of creation itself. "Your quarrel is with me, not with one who serves faithfully." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, my dear goddess," Alderic replied, gesturing to the elaborate magical circle that had been carved into the floor around his throne. "Your love for this creature is precisely what makes you vulnerable. Observe." The binding spell activated with a sound like reality tearing, chains of dark magic erupting from the circle to wrap around Amorata's divine form. But these weren't ordinary restraints, they were forged from the very love she bore for Lysander, turned against her by the king's perverted magic. "The more you struggle, the more pain your beloved endures," Alderic explained with sadistic pleasure. "Submit to my will, and I will spare him. Resist, and watch him suffer eternally." The goddess's anguish was terrible to behold, her radiant form flickering as she wrestled with an impossible choice. To submit would mean enslaving her divine nature to a madman's whims, corrupting the very essence of love itself. But to resist meant condemning Lysander to endless torment. "There is another way," she whispered, her voice breaking with grief and determination. "I can sever the bonds that tie me to this form, scatter my essence beyond your reach, but the backlash will destroy everything within 100 miles. "You wouldn't dare," Alderic snarled, but uncertainty crept into his proud voice. "You're the goddess of love, you wouldn't sacrifice innocent lives to spite me." "I am the goddess of love," Amorata replied, her form beginning to blaze with terrible radiance. "And sometimes love requires the ultimate sacrifice. Forgive me, my faithful guardian. I will find you again, in whatever form the future brings." The vision ended abruptly as the crystal couldn't contain the raw power of the goddess's self-destruction. But they had all felt the echo of that final moment, the agony of separation, the desperate hope that love would triumph over death, and the guardian's wordless scream of loss as his beloved chose obliteration over Ka. Enslavement. In the silence that followed, Isla found herself trembling with the aftershocks of memories that weren't quite her own. She understood now why Lysander had looked at her with such desperate longing. She was the echo of someone he had loved and lost, carrying fragments of a soul that had been his entire reason for existence. "I'm not her," she whispered, the words like shards of glass in her throat. "I carry her essence, her memories, but I'm not the same person who loved you all those centuries ago." Lysander's face crumpled with pain, but he nodded slowly. "I know," he said, his voice hollow with centuries of grief. "I've known since the moment I saw you that you were different, but the hope that some part of her survived in you, it's the only thing that's kept me sane through the long years of searching. And what if that part isn't enough?" Isla asked, tears streaming down her cheeks for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. "What if I can never be what you need me to be? Then I will love whoever you choose to become," he replied without hesitation. "The bond between us may have been forged in another life, but love is always a choice. I choose to love Isla the seamstress as much as I loved Amorata the goddess." His words sent warmth flooding through her chest, but they also intensified the pressure she felt from all sides. The three nobles were watching this exchange with expressions ranging from calculation to barely concealed frustration. They had come here to claim a goddess for their kingdoms, not to witness a reunion between star-crossed lovers. "This is all very touching," Lord Cassius said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it doesn't change the fundamental issue. The goddess's power could prevent the war that threatens to consume the entire continent. Personal feelings cannot be allowed to override that responsibility." Lady Seraphina stepped forward, her emerald eyes glittering with something that might have been sympathy. "Perhaps there's a compromise to be found. What if the goddess were to establish her primary temple in one of our kingdoms, but offer her blessings equally to all three? A rotating schedule of divine favor that prevents any single nation from gaining too much advantage." "Unacceptable," Prince Darian said firmly. "My people need the guarantee of divine protection, not the promise of occasional attention. The Seven Border has been plagued by incursions from the Shadowlands for months. Without constant divine warding, entire cities could fall." The mention of the Shadowlands sent a chill through the chamber. Isla had heard whispers of that cursed realm, the dead land created by King Alderic's defeat 3 centuries ago. It was said that the very air there was poison. The corrupted creatures emerged from its borders to prey on the living. "The Shadowlands are expanding?" she asked, her divine instincts responding to the threat with growing alarm. "Rapidly," Prince Darian confirmed. "Whatever force contained them for 3 centuries is weakening. Our border settlements report shadows moving in broad daylight, plants withering at their touch, animals fleeing en masse towards safer territories." Lysander's expression darkened with understanding. "It's because she's awakened," he said grimly. "The magical backlash from your previous death created a wound in reality itself. Your return is destabilizing the barriers that held it in check." The weight of responsibility settled on Isla's shoulders like a crushing burden. Not only was she expected to choose between kingdoms and prevent war, but her very existence was apparently causing a supernatural catastrophe that threatened countless innocent lives. "Then I have to go there," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "I have to heal the wound my death created." "Absolutely not," Lysander said immediately, his protective instincts blazing to life. "The Shadowlands are death incarnate. Even in your full divine power, approaching them would be incredibly dangerous." "But I can't just ignore the problem," Isla protested. "If my awakening is making things worse, then I have a responsibility to fix it." Lord Cassius laughed harshly. "Fix it? My dear girl, the combined armies of all 3 kingdoms couldn't make a dent in the Shadowlands' defenses. What makes you think one newly awakened goddess could succeed where military might has failed?" "Because she's not just any goddess," Lady Seraphina said thoughtfully. "She's the incarnation of divine love, and the Shadowlands are a realm of absolute despair. Their antithetical forces, her very presence there might be enough to begin the healing process. Or it might kill her instantly. Lysander countered. The shadows feed on life force, on hope, on everything she represents. Sending her there would be like throwing a candle into an ocean of darkness. Prince Darien had been silent during this exchange, his expression distant as he processed the implications. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with reluctant understanding. There is another possibility, he said slowly. The ancient texts speak of a ritual called the convergence of hearts. If performed correctly, it could channel the combined divine essence of love through multiple mortal anchors, creating a force powerful enough to cleanse even the deepest corruption. Multiple anchors? Isla asked, though she suspected she already knew what he meant. Representatives from each kingdom, he confirmed. Individuals who have proven their worthiness through trials of courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. The ritual would bind them temporarily to your divine essence, allowing them to serve as conduits for your power while protecting you from the Shadowlands' influence. The three nobles exchanged glances that spoke of old rivalries and mutual suspicion. Entrusting their lives to a magical ritual that required cooperation between their kingdoms went against everything their political instincts told them. Who would serve as these anchors? Lord Cassius asked warily. We would, Lady Seraphina said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. The three of us. We came here to claim the goddess's favor. Let us prove our worthiness by risking everything to help her heal the realm. A pretty speech, Lord Cassius replied. But how do we know this isn't some elaborate scheme by Soltara to gain an advantage? Binding our life forces to the goddess would give your kingdom unprecedented influence over her decisions. Because the binding works both ways, Prince Darien explained. If any one of us tried to manipulate or coerce her, the ritual would collapse and we would all die. It requires absolute trust and mutual respect to function. Lysander shook his head vehemently. I won't allow it. I've lost her once to the machinations of ambitious mortals. I won't risk losing her again. It's not your choice to make, Isla said quietly, but with a firmness that surprised even her. I appreciate your protection, your love, your centuries of faithful service. But I am not the same goddess who died in King Alderic's throne room. I am Isla, and I will make my own decisions about how to use whatever power I possess. The hurt in his starlit eyes was almost unbearable, but she forced herself to continue. If there's a chance to heal the Shadowlands and prevent the war between the kingdoms, then I have to take it. Not because I'm commanded to, but because it's the right thing to do. And if the ritual fails? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If I lose you again to your own noble intentions? Then you'll know that I chose my fate freely, she replied, reaching out to take his hand in hers. That's more than the goddess had in her final moments. At least this time, the choice would be mine. The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a shroud. They were discussing the very real possibility of her death, the potential end of a love story that had already endured more tragedy than most mortals could imagine. But Isla felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, for the first time since her awakening. She was taking control of her own destiny rather than being pulled in different directions by the demands of others. Very well, Lord Cassius said after a long moment. If we're going to attempt this mad scheme, we'll need to prepare thoroughly. The convergence of hearts is not a ritual to be undertaken lightly. The temple's archives contain the complete instructions, Prince Darien confirmed. But we'll need 3 days to gather the necessary components and prepare ourselves mentally for the binding. 3 days, Lady Seraphina mused. Barely enough time to set our affairs in order and send word to our kingdoms. If we don't return, you will return, Isla said with a conviction that surprised her. All of us will. The goddess who died in that throne room chose sacrifice over submission, but she also chose hope over despair. I refuse to believe that hope was misplaced. As they prepared to leave the crystal chamber and begin their preparations, Lysander caught her hand and pulled her aside. His expression was a mixture of love, fear, and desperate determination. If we're going to do this, he said quietly, then I want you to know something. The bond between us sits not just about the past. It's about who you are now, who you choose to become. I watched you grow from that frightened girl in the seamstress shop into someone who can face down 3 kingdoms and volunteer to heal a wound in reality itself. That courage, that compassion, it's not divine inheritance. It's purely you. His words touched something deep in her heart, a part of her that had always felt inadequate and overlooked. To be seen and valued for her own qualities rather than her divine heritage was a gift beyond price. "I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "If the ritual goes wrong, if something happens to me, don't spend another 3 centuries searching for echoes of Prate. Who I used to be. Live, Lysander. Find joy and purpose beyond serving as my guardian. Promise me." He was quiet for so long that she began to fear he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with the effort of making a vow that went against every instinct he possessed. "I promise," he said, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted of starlight and infinite sorrow. "But you have to promise me something in return. Promise me you'll fight to come back. Not for duty, not for the kingdoms or the people who need you, but for yourself, for the life you deserve to live. I promise." She whispered against his lips and felt the weight of destiny shifting around them like the turning of cosmic wheels. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. The temple's archives yielded their kaf, secrets reluctantly, requiring hours of study to unlock the mysteries of the convergence of hearts. The ritual was more complex than any of them had anticipated, requiring precise timing, absolute mental discipline, and a level of trust between participants that bordered on the impossible. The components alone were daunting: moon water collected during a lunar eclipse, crystals that had been singing in harmony for at least a century, phoenix down that still held the memory of rebirth. But Lysander's centuries of wandering had made him an expert at finding rare magical materials, and by the second day, they had assembled everything required. The most challenging aspect was the mental preparation. Each of the 3 nobles would need to open their minds completely to Isla's divine essence, allowing her power to flow through them without any mental barriers or reservations. For people accustomed to political maneuvering and carefully guarded secrets, the vulnerability required was almost unthinkable. "I keep expecting one of them to back out," Isla confided to Lysander as they walked through the temple gardens on the evening before the ritual. "The risk they're taking for their kingdoms, it's extraordinary." "Perhaps," he replied, his tone thoughtful. "Or perhaps they finally realize that some things are more important than political advantage. The Shadowlands threaten everyone equally: kings and peasants, nobles and commoners. In the face of existential threat, old rivalries seem petty." They paused beside a fountain where crystal-clear water danced in patterns that defied natural law, each droplet catching the starlight like tiny diamonds. The beauty of the scene was almost heartbreaking in its perfection, a reminder of what they were fighting to preserve. "Are you afraid?" Isla asked, her voice barely audible above the fountain's melodic splashing. "Terrified," Lysander admitted without hesitation. "Not of death, I've grown used to that possibility over the centuries. I'm afraid of losing you just when I've found you again, afraid that you'll sacrifice yourself for others the way she did." "And if I don't?" Isla asked, turning to face him in the starlight. "If we succeed, if the Shadowlands are healed and the kingdoms find peace, what then? What do we become when the crisis is over?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "Whatever you want us to become," he said finally. "I told you love is always a choice. I choose to love Isla the seamstress, the woman who stood up to 3 kingdoms and volunteered to heal a wound in reality. Whatever power you wield, whatever throne you claim or refuse, that choice remains constant." His words were like balm to her uncertain heart. Tomorrow she would face the greatest challenge of either of her lives, but tonight she was simply a woman standing beside someone who loved her for exactly who she was. "I want to remember this moment," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him beneath the dancing stars. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want to remember that for one perfect evening, I was exactly where I belonged. The morning of the ritual dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself reflected the gravity of what they were about to attempt. The three nobles gathered in the temple's central chamber with expressions of grim determination? Their usual political masks set aside in favor of honest apprehension. The moon reaches its zenith in 6 hours, Prince Darian announced, consulting an ancient astronomical chart. We need to begin the preliminary bindings within the hour if we want to synchronize properly with the prani, celestial alignment. Lord Cassius stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the magical light that emanated from the ritual circle they had carved into the marble floor. Before we begin, I want it understood that whatever differences exist between our kingdoms, today we act as one. The success of this ritual depends on our ability to trust each other completely. Agreed, Lady Seraphina said, her emerald eyes reflecting the same resolve that had driven her to volunteer for this desperate gambit. Our kingdoms may be rivals, but we face a common enemy that threatens all civilization. The ritual itself was unlike anything Isla had ever experienced. As the three nobles took their positions around the circle, she felt their life forces beginning to resonate with her divine essence. The connection was intimate beyond description. She could feel their fears, their hopes, their deepest motivations laid bare to her awareness. From Lord Cassius came a surprising depth of genuine concern for his people, hidden beneath layers of aristocratic coldness. His kingdom had suffered through harsh winters and failed harvests, and his pursuit of divine favor had been driven by desperation rather than mere ambition. Lady Seraphina's mind revealed a brilliant strategic intellect coupled with a scholar's genuine love of knowledge. Her interest in Isla wasn't just political. She was fascinated by the mechanics of divine reincarnation and the implications for magical theory. Prince Darian's consciousness carried the weight of leadership thrust upon him too young, the burden of trying to protect his people from threats that conventional weapons couldn't touch. His offer of sanctuary hadn't been political maneuvering but genuine compassion for someone caught in circumstances beyond their control. As the ritual reached its crescendo, Isla felt their combined essence merging with her divine power, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The sensational's overwhelming love amplified through three mortal hearts, each one adding their own unique resonance to the harmony they were creating together. Now, Lysander said, his voice cutting through the crescendo of power that filled the chamber. The portal to the Shadowlands is opening. You must go through together, maintain the connection no matter what horrors you face. The portal appeared as a tear in the very fabric of reality, its edges crackling with dark energy that seemed to devour the light around it. Through the opening, they could see a landscape of absolute desolation, twisted trees reaching toward a sky the color of dried blood, ground that looked like it had been salted with ash and despair. "Stay close to me," Isla commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her fully manifested divine nature. "The shadows will try to separate us, to break the bonds we've forged. Remember who you are, remember why we're here." They stepped through the portal together, and immediately the Shadowlands' influence crashed over them like a tide of pure malevolence. The very air seemed to whisper of failure and futility, trying to convince them that their mission was hopeless, that love was a lie, and hope a cruel delusion. But the convergence of hearts held firm, their combined essence blazing like a beacon in the endless darkness. With each step they took deeper into the corrupted realm, Isla could feel the wound in reality growing closer, festering tear where King Alderic's binding spell had gone catastrophically wrong. The shadow creatures that emerged to attack them were unlike anything from the mortal realm. They moved like living smoke, their forms shifting between nightmare shapes that defied description. But they recoiled from the divine light that surrounded the ritual participants, unable to approach within striking distance of such concentrated love and hope. "There," Prince Darian gasped, pointing toward a structure that rose from the desolation like a monument to madness. It was the remains of King Alderic's castle, twisted and corrupted by 3 centuries of dark magic. At its heart, they could see the source of the realm's poisonous swirling vortex of negative energy that pulsed with the rhythm of a diseased heart. "The binding circle," Lady Seraphina breathed, her scholarly mind recognizing the perverted magical formations that still glowed with malevolent power. "It's still active after all these centuries, still trying to complete the spell that died with its caster. "Then we destroy it," Lord Cassius declared, raising his hand where divine light flickered around his fingers. "We pour our combined power into that wound and cauterize it closed." But as they approached the castle's ruins, Isla felt something that made her divine essence recoil in recognition and horror. The binding circle wasn't just still. Activate was still trying to complete its original purpose. Even after 3 centuries, even with its creator long dead, the spell continued to seek out divine essence to bind and corrupt. "It's a trap," she realized, but her warning came too late. The moment they crossed the threshold of the ruined castle, the binding circle flared to life with renewed vigor, chains of dark magic erupting from the corrupted stones to wrap around their combined aura. "The same spell," Lysander's voice echoed across the dimensions, carrying his desperate fear. "It's the same binding that killed her before." But this time was different. This time, Isla wasn't facing the choice alone. The 3 nobles who had bound themselves to her divine essence shed the burden of the binding chains, their mortal determination adding strength to her divine will. And more importantly, she wasn't paralyzed by the fear of losing a loved one. She was fighting alongside allies who had chosen to share her fate. "Together," she commanded, and felt their minds linking with hers in perfect harmony. "We break this curse not through destruction, but through transformation. We turn this monument to hatred into a beacon of hope." The power that flowed through them then was beyond anything the original Amorata had possessed. It was divine love amplified through moral courage, shaped by the hard-won wisdom of 3 kingdoms that had chosen cooperation over conquest. The binding chains shattered like glass, and the corrupted vortex at the castle's heart began to shift and change. Where darkness had reigned for 3 centuries, light began to bloom. The poisoned ground cracked and split, revealing fertile soil beneath the layers of ash and despair. The twisted trees straightened, their branches reaching toward a sky that was slowly clearing from blood red to natural blue. "It's working!" Prince Darian gasped, his voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "The realm is healing itself." But the effort was taking its toll on all of them. Isla could feel the 3 nobles' life forces burning like candles in a hurricane, their mortal forms struggling to channel the vast energies required for such a transformation. She had to make a choice: complete the healing and risk their lives, or preserve their strength and lead the Shadowlands only partially cleansed. "Hold on," she whispered, pouring her own essence into the connection to strengthen their failing bodies. "Just a little longer. We can finish this." The final moments of the ritual were a blur of power and will. Divine love reshaping reality itself through the combined determination of 4 souls united in purpose. When the last of the corruption finally burned away, they collapsed together in what had once been King Alderic's throne room, now transformed into a garden of impossible beauty. "We did it," Lady Seraphina whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion but bright with triumph. "The Shadowlands are gone. The wound is healed." Around them, the evidence of their success stretched to the horizon. Where desolation had reigned for 3 centuries, new life was already beginning to flourish. Flowers bloomed in patterns that spoke of divine blessing, while streams of crystal-clear water wound their way through meadows of grass so green it seemed to glow with inner light. "The ritual is complete," Lord Cassius said, struggling to his feet with obvious effort. "The binding between us is dissolving. We'll return to being representatives of our kingdoms, and you'll return to being—" What exactly? It was a fair question, one that Isla hadn't fully considered in the desperate rush to heal the Shadowlands. She was still the reincarnated goddess of love, still possessed of divine power that could reshape the world. But she was also still Isla the Seamstress, the girl who had learned the value of simple kindness in Madame Cordelia's workshop. "I'll be whatever the realm needs me to be," she said finally, accepting Lysander's hand as he helped her to her feet. "But on my own terms, by my own choices. No more kingdoms claiming me as property, no more being treated as a prize to be won." Prince Darian smiled, the expression transforming his young face with genuine warmth. "I think I speak for all 3 kingdoms when I say we'd be honored to have your friendship rather than your subjugation. What we've accomplished here today, it could never have been achieved through conquest or coercion. Agreed, Lady Seraphina said, brushing dirt from her travel-stained clothes. Though I hope this doesn't mean the end of our association entirely. There's so much I'd like to learn about divine magic and the nature of reincarnation. And my people could benefit greatly from temples dedicated to love and healing, Lord Cassius added, his tone formal but sincere. If you were willing to bless such endeavors, of course. Isla looked around at the three nobles who had risked everything to help her heal a wound that threatened the entire realm. They were still rivals, still representatives of kingdoms with competing interests, but they were also something more now, partners who had shared the most intimate magical working possible, united by an experience that transcended political boundaries. I think we can arrange something, she said, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders once more, but this time, it felt less like a burden and more like a mantle of honor freely chosen. But first, I have a promise to keep to someone who's been waiting far too long. She turned to Lysander, seeing her own wonder and relief reflected in his starlit eyes. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious, not through power or conquest, but through love freely given and shared among allies. What happens now? He asked, echoing the question that hung unspoken in the air around them. Now, Isla said, reaching out to take his hand in hers, we choose our own path. No ancient prophecies, no binding destinies, no kingdoms telling us what we owe them. Just us, deciding day by day how to use whatever gifts we've been given. The portal back to the Temple of Concordia shimmered to life before them, its edges no longer crackling with dark energy but glowing with the same gentle radiance that had transformed the Shadowlands. As they prepared to step through and return to the world they had helped to save, Isla felt a profound sense of completion. She was no longer the frightened seamstress who had pricked her finger on ivory silk, nor was she exactly the goddess who had died in King Alderic's throne room. She was something new, something chosen rather than inherited, a divine being who had learned the value of mortal connections. A mortal woman who had discovered the strength that came from embracing rather than hiding from her true nature. Behind, them, the transformed realm stretched to the horizon, a testament to what could be accomplished when love was given freely, rather than demanded or bound by obligation. Ahead lay a future unwritten, full of possibilities that no prophecy could contain. Ready? Lysander asked, his voice carrying echoes of the promise they had made beneath the dancing stars. Ready, Isla replied, and together they stepped through the portal toward whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them as they had faced the darkness, united, unbound, and utterly free to choose their own destiny. The Temple of Concordia welcomed them back with its characteristic serenity. But the world beyond its walls would never be quite the same. News of the Shadowlands' transformation spread rapidly through the three kingdoms, carried by merchants and travelers who could scarcely believe the reports of green meadows where toxic wasteland had existed for centuries. In the days that followed, delegations arrived from across the realm not to claim or command, but to offer thanks and seek blessing. Isla received them all with the same grace, whether they were kings or farmers, scholars or soldiers. Each visitor left with a small blessing, a touch of divine love that would help them find their own path to happiness and fulfillment. Madame Cordelia arrived on a sunny afternoon 3 weeks after the ritual, her weathered face bright with pride and wonder as she beheld the young woman her foundling had become. The reunion was everything Isla had hoped for, and more, tears and laughter, and the deep satisfaction that came from honoring the bonds that truly mattered. I always knew you were special, the old seamstress said, holding Isla's hands in her calloused ones. Not because of any divine power or mystical heritage, but because of the kindness in your heart. That's still there, isn't it? Beneath all the golden light and cosmic responsibility? It's still there, Isla assured her, and meant every word. It always will be. The three kingdoms eventually established a new tradition, the Festival of Convergence, held annually on the anniversary of the Shadowlands' healing. Representatives from all three realms would gather at the Temple of Concordia to renew their bonds of cooperation and receive the goddess's blessing on their continued peace. Lord Cassius returned to Valdris and instituted sweeping reforms that softened his kingdom's harsh militaristic culture. Lady Seraphina founded a new school of magical research in, quote, Siltara, dedicated to understanding the intersection between divine and mortal power. Prince Darian, perhaps changed most of all by his experience, became known throughout Nethys as the Compassionate Prince, a ruler who led through inspiration rather than command. But for all the grand transformations and political changes, Isla found her greatest joy in the smaller moments. Working in the temple gardens with Lysander, teaching young couples the rituals that would bless their unions, offering comfort to those who had lost their way in matters of the heart. The goddess who had once blessed harvests and royal weddings now found equal satisfaction in helping a shy baker find the courage to court his beloved, or mending the heart of a woman whose marriage had turned bitter. "Do you ever regret it?" Lysander asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "Giving up the chance to rule as goddess queen of one of the great kingdoms?" Isla considered the question seriously, as she did all matters that touched on the choices that had brought them to this point. "I think," she said finally, "that ruling through love is more powerful than ruling through divine mandate. The nobles who visit us now, they come because they choose to, because they've seen what we can accomplish together. That means more to me than 1,000 conquered territories. Even if it means less luxury, less comfort than a palace could provide." She laughed, gesturing toward the simple but beautiful quarters they shared within the temple. "Have you seen a palace garden that sings with the voices of blessed couples? Have you tasted wine that's been aged in gratitude rather than fear? I think we have luxuries here that no throne room could match." As if summoned by her words, a soft chiming filled the air, the sound the temple made when new visitors approached with hearts full of hope and love. They could see the couple walking up the winding path, their hands clasped tightly together, their faces bright with the anticipation of those about to begin a new chapter of their lives. "Duty calls," Lysander said with a smile, though he made no move to rise from their comfortable spot on the garden wall. "It's not duty," Isla corrected, standing and smoothing her simple dress a far cry from the elaborate gowns the kingdoms had offered her, but infinitely more comfortable. "It's joy. It's the chance to help two people find the happiness that everyone deserves." Together they walked toward the temple entrance where the young couple waited, their love shining so brightly that it seemed to add its own light to the gathering dusk. This was what Isla had been born to do, not to rule kingdoms or command armies, but to nurture the bonds that made life worth living. The goddess who had died in chains had been reborn in freedom, and she intended to use every moment of her new existence to ensure that love would always triumph over those who would seek to bind or corrupt it. In the end, that was the most divine purpose of all. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their light reflected in the crystal streams that wound through the temple grounds, Isla felt the contentment that came from a life lived in accordance with one's truest nature. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, surrounded by those who loved her for who she was rather than what she could provide. The girl who had been nobody special had become someone extraordinary, not through the accident of divine inheritance, but through the choices she had made and the love she had chosen to share with the world. And in that transformation, she had discovered a truth that no amount of political maneuvering or mystical power could challenge, that the greatest magic of all was the simple act of choosing to love and be loved in return. In the years that followed, the realm prospered as it never had before. The three kingdoms found new ways to cooperate and compete that strengthened rather than weakened their bonds. Trade flourished along routes that had once been contested borders. Scholars from all three realms collaborated on projects that advanced knowledge and understanding. Most importantly, the common people, farmers and artisans, merchants and crafters found their lives touched by a gentleness that had been missing from the world for too long. And at the heart of it all was the Temple of Concordia, where a goddess who had chosen love over power continued to bless all who came to her with open hearts and honest intentions. The seamstress who had pricked her finger on ivory silk had become the thread that wove the realm together, creating a tapestry of connection and compassion that would endure long after her current incarnation had passed into legend. For love, once freely given and joyfully received, has a way of creating its own immortality, not in the preservation of any single form or life, but in the endless ripple effects it creates across generations and realms. The story might have ended there, with happiness secured and balance restored to the world. But love stories, true love stories, are never really about endings. They're about the infinite ways two souls choose each other, again and again, through every challenge and triumph that life presents. 5 years after the healing of the Shadowlands, Isla stood in the temple's highest tower, watching the sunrise paint the sky in familiar shades of rose and gold. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her abdomen, where new life grew the child of a goddess and her guardian, conceived not through divine mandate or political necessity, but through the simple, powerful choice to create something beautiful together. Nervous? Lysander asked, appearing beside her with the silent grace that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Terrified, she admitted with a laugh that held equal parts joy and apprehension. What do we know about raising the child of a goddess? The histories don't exactly provide a guidebook for divine parenting. We know how to love, he replied, his arms sliding around her waist with the easy intimacy of partners who had chosen each other across lifetimes. Everything else, we'll figure out together. Through the tower's crystal windows they could see the transformed landscape that stretched to every horizon. Where the Shadowlands had once festered, towns and cities now flourished, their spires reaching toward the sky like prayers made manifest. Trade roads wove between kingdoms that had once stood on the brink of war, carrying not just goods but ideas, art, and the endless human capacity for connection. But perhaps most beautiful of all were the smaller transformations, the couples who had found courage to love openly, the families reunited after years of estrangement, the communities that had learned to celebrate diversity rather than fear it. Every blessing Isla had offered, every heart she had helped to heal, had created ripples that spread far beyond her direct influence. The delegation from the eastern reaches arrived this morning, Lysander mentioned, his tone carefully neutral. They're requesting your guidance on a matter involving their ancient treaties with the Sea People. Isla sighed, recognizing the diplomatic dance that still surrounded her existence. 5 years of proven neutrality and wise counsel hadn't entirely eliminated the political maneuvering that followed divine beings, though it had certainly reduced the pressure. Now kingdoms came to her seeking mediation rather than claiming her allegiance, which was progress of a sort. Another border dispute? She asked, though she was already preparing to descend to the receiving chamber where her supplicants waited. Something more complex, I think, Lysander replied. The Sea People have been reporting strange currents in the deep waters, phenomena that suggest magical disturbances. They're wondering if it might be connected to your condition. Isla's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where their unborn child rested peacefully. The pregnancy had been progressing normally by all conventional measures, but there had been unusual magical manifestations, flowers blooming out of season wherever she walked, wildlife gathering in unprecedented harmony around the temple grounds, and most notably, a strengthening of the bonds between lovers throughout the realm. You think the baby is already affecting the world? She asked, the possibility both thrilling and concerning. Divine children have always been catalysts for change, Lysander said carefully. But given who you are, what we've accomplished together, I suspect this little one might be something entirely new. Before Isla could respond, a soft chiming filled the air, but this wasn't the familiar sound that announced visitors. This was something else, a harmonic resonance that seemed to come from the very stones of the temple itself. The building was responding to something, recognizing a presence that it found worthy of acknowledgement. They descended the spiral staircase together, Isla moving with the careful grace of advanced pregnancy while Lysander hovered protectively nearby. The receiving chamber was already occupied when they arrived, not just by the delegation from the eastern reaches, but by an unexpected assemblage that made Isla's breath catch in her throat. Madame Cordelia sat in the place of honor, her weathered hands folded peacefully in her lap as she watched the doorway with the patient expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to unfold. Beside her stood the 3 former rivals, Lord Cassius, Lady Seraphina, and Prince Darian, though all 3 bore the signs of the years that had passed since their desperate ritual in the Shadowlands. Lord Cassius's silver hair had gone completely white, though his bearing remained as proud as ever. The harsh lines around his eyes had softened somewhat, testament to the reforms he had implemented in Valdris. Lady Seraphina's emerald eyes sparkled with the enthusiasm of the scholar who had discovered wonders beyond her wildest theories, while Prince Darien carried himself with the quiet confidence of a ruler who had found his true calling in service to his people. But it was the figure standing apart from the others that made Isla's divine senses sing with recognition and wonder. She appeared to be a young woman, perhaps 18 or 19, with the kind of ethereal beauty that suggested otherworldly origins. Her hair shifted color as she moved, flowing from silver to gold to deep auburn like captured moonbeams, and her eyes held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom. "Mother," the young woman said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the temple walls hum in response. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." The word hit Isla like a thunderbolt, her mind reeling as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Mother? But we have it, time moves differently for beings like us," the young woman explained, stepping forward with movements that seemed to dance between dimensions. "I am your daughter, born not just from your union with Lysander but from the love you've shared with the entire realm. Every blessing you've given, every heart you've healed, it all contributed to my creation." Lysander's hand found Isla's, his fingers intertwining with hers as they faced this impossible revelation together. "What are you?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "I am what you might call a daughter of Concordia," she replied, her smile radiant enough to make the assembled dignitaries squint. "Born from the intersection of divine love and mortal choice, shaped by the harmony you've created between the kingdoms. I am proof that love, freely given, can create entirely new forms of existence." Madame Cordelia rose from her chair, her movements careful but determined as she approached the group. "She appeared to me in a dream 3 nights ago," the old seamstress said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by mere miracles. "Told me it was time for a family reunion, and that I should gather everyone who had played a part in your story." "But why?" Isla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The strange currents the sea people had reported, the increasing magical harmonies throughout the realm, it all pointed to a fundamental shift in the nature of reality itself. "Because something new is beginning," her future daughter explained. "The healing of the Shadowlands was just the first step in a larger transformation. The realm is evolving, becoming something that can sustain not just mortal life but new forms of existence that bridge the gap between divine and human." Lady Seraphina stepped forward, her scholarly instincts overriding her diplomatic training. "The magical resonance patterns we've been monitoring, they've been building toward this moment, haven't they? Your appearance here isn't just a family visit. It's a catalyst." "Very perceptive," the daughter of Concordia replied with approval. "The love my mother has shared, the bonds she's helped to forge, they've created a network of connection that spans the entire continent. That network is about to become something more than the sum of its parts." Prince Darien's expression grew thoughtful as he processed the implications. "A new age," he said slowly, "not just politically or socially, but fundamentally. You're talking about the birth of a new kind of civilization. One where the barriers between kingdoms, between mortal and divine, between different forms of existence, become permeable," the young woman confirmed. "A realm where love truly does conquer all, not through force or conquest, but through the simple recognition that all beings share the same fundamental desire for connection and understanding." Lord Cassius, ever practical despite his transformed nature, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "And what does this mean for those of us who live in the world as it currently exists? What's our role in this transformation?" "You are the bridge," Isla's daughter replied, her gaze encompassing not just the former rivals but everyone present. "Each of you represents a different aspect of the harmony that's being born. The warrior who learned to value peace, the scholar who discovered wisdom in cooperation, the prince who found strength in service, the craftsperson who taught a goddess the value of simple things, the guardian who chose love over duty, and the goddess who remembered that divinity means nothing without connection to those we serve." As she spoke, the air in the chamber began to shimmer with visible energy, threads of golden light that connected each person present to all the others. Isla could see the network Lady Seraphina had mentioned, the vast web of relationships and bonds that stretched across the realm like a living tapestry. The child you carry, the daughter of Concordia continued, addressing Isla directly, will be the first of a new generation beings born into a world where love and power are not separate forces, but aspects of the same fundamental truth. Through them and their descendants, the transformation will become permanent, irreversible. Lysander's grip on Isla's hand tightened, not from fear but from the overwhelming magnitude of what they were witnessing. "We're not just having a baby," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We're participating in the birth of a new kind of reality. Every choice you've made, from the moment you refused to be claimed as property to your decision to heal the Shadowlands together, has led to this moment," the young woman confirmed. "You proved that love can transcend the limitations that mortals place on possibility. Now the universe is adjusting to accommodate that truth." Madame Cordelia moved closer to Isla, her weathered hand reaching out to touch the goddess's cheek with the familiarity of someone who had earned the right through years of patient care. "I always knew you were destined for something extraordinary," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I never imagined it would be this extraordinary." "None of us did," Isla replied, her own voice unsteady as she processed the magnitude of what was unfolding. "When I pricked my finger on that wedding dress, I was just a seamstress trying to avoid another scolding. Now I'm apparently midwifing the birth of a new age." "That's the beauty of love," her daughter observed with a smile that held centuries of wisdom despite her apparent youth. "It always exceeds our expectations, always creates more than we thought possible. You began by trying to mend fabric, and ended up mending the fabric of reality itself." The golden threads of connection pulsed brighter, and through them, Isla could feel the presence of everyone they had touched over the past 5 years. The couple they had blessed just that morning, the merchant whose heart had been broken by betrayal until she helped him find the courage to trust again, the children born to parents who had found love through the festivals of Concordia. All of them were part of this vast network of connection that was becoming something greater than anyone had imagined. "What happens now?" Prince Darian asked, his practical mind already working through the implications of such a fundamental transformation. "Now," the daughter of Concordia replied, "you continue doing what you've been doing. Love freely, choose compassionately, build bridges instead of walls. The transformation isn't something that will happen overnight, it's something that grows through countless small acts of connection and understanding." "But it will happen," Lady Seraphina said, her scholar's intuition grasping the certainty underlying the young woman's words. "It's already happening," came the reply. "Every day, in every kingdom, people are choosing love over fear, cooperation over conquest, understanding over prejudice. The network grows stronger, the connections deepen, and what once seemed impossible becomes simply inevitable." Lord Cassius straightened, his military bearing reasserting itself as he faced the prospect of his role in this new age. "Then we better make sure we're worthy of it," he said firmly. "If we're to be part of something this significant, we have a responsibility to live up to the trust that's been placed in us." "You already are," Isla said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "All of you. The choices you made during the healing of the Shadowlands, the changes you've implemented in your kingdom since then, you've been building this new world without even realizing it." The conversation was interrupted by a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere, a sense of completion settling over the assembled group like a benediction. The daughter of Concordia began to fade, her form becoming translucent as the energy that had manifested her presence started to dissipate. "My time here is ending," she said, though her voice remained clear despite her diminishing visibility. "But we will meet again, in the proper sequence of events. When you hold your actual child in your arms, remember this moment, remember that love creates possibilities that logic cannot predict." "Wait," Isla called out, reaching toward her disappearing daughter. "There's so much I want to ask you, so much I need to know about what's coming." "You'll know what you need to know when you need to know it," the young woman replied with a laugh that sounded like silver bells. "Trust in the love that brought you this far, and let it guide you through whatever comes next. After all, You've already proven that impossible things become possible when hearts unite in common purpose. As her form faded completely, the golden threads of connection settled into a gentle, steady glow that would remain visible to those with the spiritual sight to perceive them. The network was established, the foundation laid for the transformation that would unfold over the years and decades to come. In the silence that followed, the assembled group found themselves looking at each other with new understanding. They weren't just individuals who had played roles in a goddess's story, they were the founding members of something unprecedented. The first generation of beings to consciously participate in the birth of a new kind of civilization. Well, Madame Cordelia said finally, her practical nature reasserting itself in the face of cosmic revelation, I suppose this means we better start planning for a very interesting future. Her words broke the spell of wonder that had held them all, and laughter began to ripple through the chamber, not the nervous laughter of those overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control, but the joyful laughter of friends and family facing an adventure together. And in that laughter, in the warmth of connection that flowed between them all, the first seeds of the new age began to truly take root. Love had indeed conquered all, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing to see the divine spark in every being they encountered. The seamstress who had been nobody special had become the mother of a new world, and the greatest magic of all was that she had done it not by abandoning her humble origins, but by staying true to the lessons they had taught her about the transformative power of genuine care and connection. In the years that followed, as the child growing within her was born and raised, as the network of love continued to strengthen and spread, Isla would often return to this moment in her memory. The day when the future announced itself, not with trumpets and proclamations, but with the quiet certainty of love fulfilled and purpose achieved. The story of the reincarnated goddess of love was far from over indeed. It was only just beginning to unfold into something larger and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. But that beginning, that first step into a transformed future, would always be rooted in the simplest and most profound truth of all. That love, freely chosen and freely given, has the power to create miracles that reshape the very foundations of existence itself. And so the tale continued, not with an ending, but with an opening, a doorway into possibilities that stretched beyond the horizon of imagination, built from the accumulated choices of those who dared to believe that love truly could conquer all. The nobody who had become somebody extraordinary had discovered that the most extraordinary thing of all was simply learning to love and be loved in return. And in that discovery, she had given birth to a new world where such miracles were not the exception but the rule. The future spread before them like an infinite tapestry, waiting to be woven from the threads of countless hearts united in common purpose. And they faced it together with the confidence of those who had already proven that impossible things were simply opportunities for love to reveal its true power. In the end, that was the most divine gift of all, not the power to command or conquer, but the ability to create something beautiful from the raw material of mortal dreams and divine possibility.